Hello and welcome back to the Smarter Building podcast powered by Symmetry, where we talk all things construction and its ever-evolving digital landscape. We're very pleased to be joined by Panu Pasanen, CEO at One Click LCA on today's show, to continue on the topic of sustainability and how we can make it easier for the industry to improve its carbon performance in the built environment. So thank you for joining us, Panu. It's a pleasure to have you, and I look forward to delving deeper into this topic with you.
Me too. Great to be here.
But before we get started, can you just let our listeners know a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe some of your hobbies?
Well, yeah, so I'm a software engineer, practicing software engineer 20 years ago. Then since then, I've been working on sustainability. And what I actually wanted to do for the first part of my career was to find a combination of being a software engineer who can contribute for the environment. Not so successfully the first few years, but later on with One Click LCA, I've been able to work on this and been doing that ever since. I'm Finnish, married, have kids, 2 cats, read a lot, that kind of thing. So pretty uninteresting life in that sense.
Sounds very interesting to me. I also have 2 cats, so I understand where you're coming from on that one. And then for those that may not be so familiar, could you just describe in short who One Click LCA are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, so One Click LCA's mission is to power the makers of a zero carbon future. And for us, the makers, they mean people who design, build, and supply materials for buildings. So it's the whole value chain for construction, infrastructure, renovation, the whole built environment, really. And in there, it's equally the construction and equally the manufacturing. And we provide software tools and training for people who need to find ways to do circular products, low carbon products, be able to just assess, even to understand where are the hotspots of carbon in there and carbon risks in their value chain, in their operations, in their design. Also compliance obviously goes into it, but the point is of course to do better and not just to get a number out of it. So we are trying to do this software company. We are supporting customers in over 150 countries, and we are headquartered out of Finland, and we have a business on all continents worldwide. We are about 20 years old company now.
Great. And you mentioned there you also look at sort of the product design side. Do you say that that side sort of is leading the space more than the building side, or is it the other way around? How do you see that?
The buildings are leading the way more in the sense that you can approach buildings a bit differently. Like you can renovate buildings, for example. I mean, it's much easier to have high circularity when you renovate the building, but it's much harder to remanufacture because for a building, you know where it's been, right? But when you have a used product, you have no idea where it's been. So you have completely different way of going about it. So buildings are a bit more progressive, but product manufacturers try to do all the same things, but liabilities are a bit stricter. So if you have, for example, a product that could have been exposed to some hazardous substances because where it's being used or installed, just makes it harder. But buildings lead, but not by a huge head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, interesting. What more do you think the product design industry needs to be doing in order to achieve the sustainability goals?
Well, remanufacturing, it's absolutely necessary that the share of materials which are manufactured first time declines and the remanufacturing becomes more important share. So design for disassembly is of course something which ultimately designers need to be supporting, but this requires also a lot from the manufacturers. So standard assembly practices, standard assembly solutions, so that you can just put things in and take things out, like in Lego building, right? I mean, that's kind of what we need to have in a form, so that the share of primary raw material consumption declines over time relative to the pace of construction. I think that's the most important single thing.
Excellent. And then just bringing it back to the building industry. So as stated in the Bring an Embodied Carbon Upfront report from the World Green Building Council, they state that buildings are currently responsible for 39% of global energy-related carbon emissions. So what would you say the key challenges around sustainability in the construction sector are, and what is causing this?
Well, the most important problem is really that the carbon targets, they are not set early enough, right? So, because if you say build me a building quickly, cheaply, I mean, you can get probably both of those, but you cannot get low carbon into it without having asked for it ahead, right? So these kind of requirements, they are too often added as an afterthought. They are added because there's some kind of certification that you want to get or similar thing, whereas it doesn't work. So to get the best outcomes and without having cost implications that are negative cost implications, you need to plan all of this in. So you need to do it systematically and run a whole process.
So then I guess that leads to the next point. Increased cost is always one of the major factors cited as slowing the adoption of sustainable construction processes. So I see that you work with government bodies on drafting regulations and policies to achieve cost-effective and durable carbon reductions. Could you just tell us a little bit more about this and how that you can help people achieve this?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to understand about the cost efficiency in low carbon construction is that you can achieve it even at cost with cost reductions if you do it early enough, because you can then actually strip out things from your plan, because there's a lot of things that are done in a standard manner, and then when you do them in a more sustainable manner, they are often material efficiencies that you can bring to bear, and that brings down the cost. Whereas then when governments are involved, yeah, we do indeed support governments on policy making, and we incidentally also help to write some regulations and set benchmark values for carbon limits. But from government's point of view, they are usually limited to what the regulatory system allows. But yeah, indeed, from the connection of the cost and regulatory optimization point of view, the best place to do this as a government is to require that the planning permission stage, and same goes for really like the whole construction industry as an industry as well, because if you think things through by that time, you'll be guaranteed to go in the right direction, so you're not having to change course later on with the associated cost implications.
And so you touched on your last question, sorts of mandates and regulations, but why should people in the construction industry start investing in LCAs from today, irrespective of those mandates and regulations?
Yeah, it's really simple. Three reasons. Nobody wants to work for your company, nobody wants to fund your company, and nobody wants to buy from your company if you don't get in line. These are the times we live in. Like certain things were okay in 18th century, certain things were okay in the last century, and this century it's a different game. Like if you want to be part of society and grow as a business, you have to have acceptability socially. So this is driven by just demand. Like people don't want to do business with you. They don't want your products. They don't want your stuff if you are not aligned with the way they work, because they work as part of the society. And obviously, conservative industries such as construction, they are not like, let's say, the peloton of society in terms of pushing for better, but the money comes from the entire society and all of the sectors in the society. So, yeah, relatively, construction is a laggard, but it cannot serve. It doesn't serve itself. It serves the entire society and entire business ecosystem.
Yeah, so I guess you kind of see it as people that aren't getting on board with this will kind of get left behind. It's what we need for the future.
Well, it's even faster and simpler than that, because construction is also a low margin industry. So if you just have a relative decline of 2% every year versus the market, you're dead. Like that's it. Like so, in a competitive industry, you cannot expose your flanks, and this is completely a flank for any business that competes after let's say serious economic opportunities. Of course, in subcontracting, you get by with a bit less of sustainability, but in design principal contracting, manufacturing, there's no way you can get away with it.
Interesting point. And I guess this sort of leads me on to the next one. So is this kind of what drove you to create One Click LCA? How and why was it born? Like, what challenges were you trying to solve?
Yeah, so at that time, we had already looked at a number of industries and what kind of sustainability problems there were. And construction really stood out. Extremely fragmented, very low design budget per asset. So if you consider like BMW, they bring out a new car, they have 100 million design budget for the car, right? You do a new building, you have 500,000 design budget for the new building. Okay, cumulatively, one new model of BMWs will have higher impact, but the one building on its own is going to be, 15,000 tons of materials. It's a tremendous environmental strain. And moreover, there's BIM models that can be used to automate. So you can, and there's also lots of levers that can be pushed, which are built into the ecosystem, which were not exploited at all back in the day when we moved into this. But we just thought this is a business in which there's drastic, let's say, inefficiency, environmental damage being done, and we actually have credible way to fix it, at least for our part. And so far, it's worked out pretty good.
And have you seen that these challenges have shifted over the years? How has it sort of evolved?
So the first half a decade, let us say, or maybe a bit more, it was just evangelization, introducing the topic, explaining that this is actually important and this is how it works, and making people aware. And then after the level of awareness was reasonable, let's say 2019 or thereabouts. So since then, it's been much more on the details of how do you get it done, right? How do you do it if you have 50,000 people working in your company? Where do you start? I mean, you cannot get 50,000 people doing low carbon all at once. You have to make deployment plans and training plans, and just sort out really a lot of implementation problems. And of course, it's become much more heterogeneous. So we did a study in 18 about the different standards and regulations, and we found, I believe, 105 or so different standards, regulations, and certifications, which included life cycle assessment. We haven't rerun the study now, but if we were to do so, I would think we would find 300-400. So like it's just growing very organically based on the awareness that was built in the past decade.
Yeah, excellent. And then just going back to you a little bit. So we can see that you're on the technical advisory committee for the Carbon Leadership Forum. Could you just tell us a bit about what that involves and its goals, and maybe how it also links to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so Carbon Leadership Forum is an American NGO, part of University of Washington, used to be. Now it is more set up as an autonomous body. And the idea being there is that to bring about the awareness. America is a latecomer in relative terms in this field, and bring about the data and tools for people to be able to work on sustainability and low carbon construction. And in the technical advisory committee, then we of course review different kinds of policy positions the Carbon Leadership Forum looks to bring forth, and consultations relating to the government policies and similar things. That's mostly it. And yeah, I mean, it's very important work in the sense that huge population, huge construction industry in the US, and of course, it has to be done locally. It is fundamentally a local industry everywhere.
Great. And so you kind of said the US is a bit behind on that. And we can see maybe like where you're from, Finland, kind of leading the way in this space, and will as a country be carbon negative by 2040. How does that make you feel? And what are the differences you see in adoption of tech to drive emissions reduction from country to country?
Well, yeah, I mean, Nordics are ahead in digital construction in general, not just adoption of LCAs and that kind of things. And of course, the society here is more attuned to sustainability in general. So if you then look at the US, it's a bit unfair to say that US is a relative laggard, because West Coast and East Coast are, quite progressive in some parts, but just it's the part in the middle that's not. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
going to that, we have seen the LCA basically follow on the back of BIM. I think is also just about modernization of construction industry. So I mean, they have to get used to using tools in the business before they can adopt things at a large scale. And um, let's say decade after BIM, you get LCA in the system.
Are there any other countries in the Nordics that are doing particularly well in this space that we could hear a bit more about?
Yeah, so yeah, we work with Norwegian government since quite a long time. So all the government projects are working with One Click LCA. And they have a unique process where they actually start before the site selection already to consider the climate impact. So they quantify the impacts of the sites, they consider the impact of new build versus retrofit, they quantify impact of transportation of people and all of those things with One Click LCA like very early on. And then they move into pre-design, target setting, and on through every stage of the project up to 2 years in post completion. And they are extremely successful, and they hit their target. They beat their reference values by over 40% on the entire mass of hundreds of different projects. And it's only possible because they have a system and they enforce it throughout the whole pipe. But they start early enough because they don't do wrong choices in the beginning. That's how they are successful with it, and they have the discipline to do it, obviously.
And do you think that is replicable across other countries as well?
Yeah, anybody who can be bothered will be able to do it. It's just laziness, or of course lack of priority in any public organization for not doing it.
And I guess if it's not legislated, it's also quite difficult for people to be bothered in a sense, isn't it? So that's quite a tricky one to get around. And I guess from the UK's perspective, BIM has been quite a slow adopter. So where do you see the UK on that spectrum in terms of LCAs and things like that?
Uh, well, UK is a bit of different animal in the sense that so much of the finance flows for the real estate industry come from the UK. So and much of that goes to central London. So it's not just like UK construction industry and London construction industry. They are kind of in some way a different animal. But because London is so over represented, it's actually doing quite good. Like in the sense that the requirements they are coming, they come from Greater London Authority, they come from the boroughs, they come from the investors. Nobody wants to touch stuff that's brown. And the fact that there's also a large design and engineering export base, like all these large companies, they export a lot of design know-how, like Foster and Partners and WSP and ICOM and whoever. They do have a competence. So in that sense, UK is doing good insofar as this part of the market is concerned. At the local level, there's still a great deal to do, and to that end, I think other cities in the UK will adopt or end up creating similar things to Greater London Authority's policy to level up in a way.
And this leads on nicely to the next point, actually. So it's also said that carbon emissions released before the built asset is used will be responsible for half of the entire carbon footprint of new construction between now and 2050, which is actually threatening to consume a large part of our remaining carbon budget. So what do you think needs to be done to prevent this?
Well, nobody probably wants to hear this, but the thing is to reduce new construction. So that's where it starts. So refurbishing assets much more efficiently is absolutely critical. And when new construction is done, it needs to be way more material efficient. So there's no like a miracle here. Like mass timber is lower carbon emission than let's say traditional concrete, but there's just so many forests in the world. It's like a limited raw material, even if it's renewing, because you need 60 years to grow the regrow the forest. So we are really in a system where we have to do absolutely material efficient solutions and extend buildings, renovate buildings, and try to recover as many things as we can from the buildings that have been built but cannot be reused because of demographics or whatever reason. So That's ultimately how it has to go. Of course, then you have to develop low carbon materials too, but volume first.
Yeah, so I guess obviously the population is increasingly growing. How do we kind of change people's thought process to look at it in a different way?
Well, that's more a question for a psychologist than myself. I'm more a practicing engineer, but we fundamentally also just have a constrained supply of land in the metropolises. So in the countries where we have green belts and similar zoning restrictions, so buildings doesn't just sprawl on and on for eternity. This is quite effective in terms of limiting the new construction. But then if you have Houston, it's super hard. Like there has to be like economic barriers or limitations to it as well. Otherwise, new construction is very appealing because there's little penalty on it, other than the carbon emissions.
So on that, could you highlight a real world example where One Click LCA has made a significant difference in optimizing the environmental performance of a project?
Yeah. So one example is this kind of land sales competition where we helped a city to award a hotel plot basically for an international hotel chain. And how we work with them is that we develop minimum targets, scoring systems, and then they let all the competitors run their assessments using One Click LCA, and we supported them by third party verifying all the results. And what they achieved there is a drastic reduction in the baseline carbon emissions. So approximately 50% decarbonization, zero cost, because obviously they were bidding for the plot according to the price mechanism that was set. And they just weighted in the decarbonization, and it's the most powerful thing you can do by far. Of course, it requires a bit of thought work to get it done, but once you do that, it's like tremendous
Yeah, I
impact.
mean, to say, reducing it by that much is very impressive. So, yeah. Are there any more sort of projects like that that you guys are working on in the near future or?
Well, it's mostly our customers who work on these projects, right? So I'm sure every major design company you can think of is working on something impressive here or there. So we engage directly with projects quite rarely, actually. So because we are a software provider, our aim is to power the makers, right? So this just happened to be a case where the city wanted us to help them directly.
So, what advice would you give to professionals and your customers, for example, in the construction and design industry who are looking to incorporate sustainability into their projects?
Start early. So you don't need to know everything, but you need to set some rules and principles and directions in the earliest phase of the project. Because suppose that you contract a designer who only knows how to design a building using one structural system, it's not going to get any better, right? I mean, no way. So you have to make the big decisions very early, and you have to then revise your thinking practice. Like, am I going to get this done in the right way if I just do business as usual? So you can still change things. There's a lot of solutions which are out there, but some of them they need to be embedded in the design. And better that you don't have to do the design twice, right?
Yeah, so with the growing importance of this in the industry, of course, and how do One Click LCAs stay up to date with these latest methodologies and standards for LCAs and also continue to adapt to new trends and these emerging technologies?
Well, it's obviously quite a lot of work. So this year we have added compliance with 9 different new regulations and standards into the platform. So we have all these compliance modules for whatever you want to work with. And I think 4 or 5 different BIM tools we have integrated, and then about 7 or 8 other national modules which allow you to model, in New Zealand, in Middle East, in Japan, things in a certain way. So it's a flurry of changes, and we of course follow them directly, and also our customers will of course listen to them, right? So they will tell us if we seem to be missing something that they would be needing. So that's how we get this stuff done.
Okay, and then so looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of One Click LCA and its impact on the broader sustainable construction landscape?
So we come from life cycle assessment, and you can reasonably say we have this carbon tunnel vision. It's a term when you only consider carbon as an optimization objective, and sustainability is of course more than that. So for a couple of years we've been adding things into this panoply. So we work with circularity, life cycle cost, compliance, and that kind of things. So what we want to really offer a complete picture, and biodiversity is our next, let's say, step on this journey. And thereafter, we'll be looking at things like human health impacts and others. So, but we really need to be able to deal with sustainability as a whole, even though carbon is the one that literally kills us if we don't get it right, in form of climate change effects. So that's how we look at this, and we look at this as a value chain integration. So the whole value chain from developer, designer, engineer, to manufacturing has to be able to work together on a common platform of data, and measure the performance in a consistent way, because it's not going to work if one of the parties claims it goes up when you do this and the other party claims the opposite. They need to be consistent metrics so that the business can work together. So that's how we look at the how we take this industry forward.
Excellent. And then are there any exciting upcoming developments that you can possibly share with our listeners for One Click LCA?
Well, yeah, we are going to have in case any listener about in London, so we're going to have a customer meeting early November there. So stay tuned if so, where we will be revealing some of our things which we launch later this year. But we do have biodiversity on the agenda pretty high, because biodiversity net gain is the way you talk about it in the UK, but it's a real problem in the same sense. It's a threat to our ecosystems everywhere, and that's one of the topics. And concrete environmental product declarations, they are another. So that's tremendously important raw material, and we need more data and better quality data, most of all, for making better decisions about where we buy our concrete. So those are two things on which we will be launching new offerings in a very near-term future, as well as mechanical, electrical, and plumbing sector. So maybe more subsector of the AEC.
Okay, interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Panu. It was great to have you and really insightful. And we look forward to seeing all these upcoming developments.
Excellent. My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.